Hello, are we recording? Yes, we are, because I can see the little red light blinking on the GoPro. Yes, right, so, this video, this is going to upset a lot of people, it really is. If we check out the main screen on the monitor here, you can see I'm at DxO Mark, and I'm doing a dynamic range comparison between a Nikon D850, a Nikon D810, and my highly respected and dearly cherished and loved D800E, which I have two of. Why have I got two of them? Well, it might become apparent a little bit later on. Anyway, DxO Mark. Funny old place, DxO Mark. You have to take everything they say with a pinch of salt. But, you know, for the most part, even though their results might be questionable, there is a certain consistency within their testing criteria. But we come to this perennial question, dynamic range versus usable dynamic range. And there are so many people, they make me smile. In fact, no, they don't make me smile, they actually make me blood boil. There are so many people out there taking photographs and what we might call YouTube influencers, with a far greater degree of sphere of influence than I have. Why that is, I do not know, but well, there you go. But there's so many of them who are landscape photographers, and, you know, one of them springs to mind. He doesn't live too far away from me. I shan't name any names, but he's always up in the Peak District. And he bought a Nikon D850, and he was singing and extolling the virtue. It's got fabulous dynamic range. The dynamic range on it is fabulous. Now he's moved to a Nikon Z7, and he's moved to a Nikon Z7 because the dynamic range is fabulous, and really and truly, the guy and all the other guys who extol all fabulous dynamic ranges really haven't got a bloody clue what the hell they're talking about, and they wouldn't know dynamic range if it bit them on the bum. Right, the thing is, they take, and I've said this in blog posts before now, they take their inference of dynamic range from the likes of DxO Mark, or worse still, from somebody else who's taken their information from DxO Mark. You won't find many camera manufacturers who actually specify the dynamic range of their cameras. Nikon certainly never do, and you are about to see why that is. So anyway, yesterday I had the I was fortunate enough to be able to tie one of my patrons down, Paul Atkins, who doesn't live too far away from me, and he has a Nikon D850, a Nikon D810 and a Nikon D800E. And so yesterday I went round to Paul's house with one of these and one of these. Okay. Now you can see quite a few videos on the internet by one or two people who actually do know what they're talking about, and specifically I'm thinking of Ken Wheeler, the angry photographer, Theoria Apathasis, and you'll see he does quite a lot with dynamic range, or he has done in the past, on various cameras. And what he uses to calculate dynamic range what he uses as a test target is a colour checker passport. And then you'll see others who use what is called Seconic's Test Target 2. Now, both the colour checker passport and Seconic's Test Target 2, which is monstrously expensive, what they require is you take a shot at the metered exposure plus 1 3 stops under and 1 3 stops over. So basically you're calculating dynamic range based on 3 sampling points if you like. And the nice thing about this Sekonic Test Target 1 is it involves more work. Yes, it does. Some more work. But we have to take 11 shots. 1 at metered and 5 at 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stop, 4 stop and 5 stops under, and 5 at 1 stop increments up to 5 stops over. So we have to process 11 shots, and oh, it's so much like hard work, isn't it? But the thing is, you end up with 11 sampling points, which is better for accuracy, isn't it? So anyway, now I'm not going to run you through the entire testing procedure at all, but if I come over to Lightroom, here we can see I've got my 11 shots here. That's metered, 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stop, 4 stop, 5 stops over, and 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stop, 4 stop, 5 stop under. And the ones marked in red for the D800E, the ones marked in yellow, it might look a little bit yellowy green, is the shots for the Nikon D810, and these down here are marked in blue are for the Nikon D850. So what we're now going to do is minimise that, and we're going to minimise that, and here we are. Here are the dynamic ranges for those 3 individual cameras. Here we can see the D800E, here we can see the Nikon D810, and here we can see the Nikon D850. Now if we look at the Nikon D850, we can see that it's got 9 stops of dynamic range, usable dynamic range. We are clipping the dynamic range at basically RGB 250 in 8-bit terms, and we are producing a very conservative clipping point at RGB 240, and we're producing a clipping point of 35 in the shadows and 21 as the actual bottom end of the dynamic range. And you can see it's a good camera, but it's 9 stops of dynamic range, not 14 and a bit. Not by any stretch of the imagination can it capture 14 stops of dynamic range from a scene in one exposure. It can't. It can under lab testing conditions, but they're pulling that much detail out of the shadows, it renders the shadows useless for fine art photography, let's put it like that. The shadows will go noisy, they'll get colour artifacts, and God alone knows what else. So to get clean exposures in highlights, midtones and shadows, we use a thing called usable dynamic range. And the usable dynamic range, using the 11 sampling points for the Nikon D850, is 9 stops. And we can see we've got like 3 2/3 of a stop above our base, yeah, or above our midtone for the highlights. So we've got like 3 2/3 of a stop, and we've got really 5 to 5 1/3 stops down into our shadows. So it's a very, very, very good camera. If we look at its predecessor, the Nikon D810, we can see we've got pretty much the same performance in the highlights. We've got 3 2/3 of a stop in the highlights, and again we're down to a clipping point, or well, an end of dynamic range down in the shadows of slightly over 5 stops. And then if we go over here to the D810's predecessor, the D800E, don't forget I have 2, we can see that again we're the same. We've got 3 2/3 up in the highlights. There's our baseline, or if you like, our midtone, which is a 118 grey, and we can see we've got 5.5 stops of shadow performance on it. That's if we want to stretch it. We could actually stretch it a little bit more up into the highlights to sort of 251, 252, but with all the cameras, it's a pointless exercise really allowing yourself to go too far up into the highlight response curve or highlight tonal response curve of the camera sensor, because you've always got to question yourself, have you actually metered for the brightest highlight in the scene? Because you might not have, you might have missed it. Yeah, you might be metering for a very bright object, but there might be one or two little specular highlights within the scene that you might have missed. So you've always got to leave yourself a little bit of headroom. Now, the funny old thing is that this is stretched out as far as I'm prepared to stretch it for my D800Es, both of them. And you can see it's 9.1 EV. Now, yeah, it's got, in theory, it's got more dynamic range than either a Nikon D810 or a Nikon D850. Yes, it has. But it's only a tenth of a stop, so really, truly, it's not worth bothering about. It's 8.9 to 9 stops of dynamic range. The Nikon D810, 8.7 stops of dynamic range. And the D850, 9 stops of dynamic range. So you've got to ask yourself, yeah, in reality, despite what anybody else says, is spending £3,500 on a D850 going to improve your photography? Not really. It's not going to improve your, can I use the phrase, image quality? It's not going to make your processing any easier than if you were working on a Nikon D810. The only thing is the Nikon D810, why did I say that? Nikon D800E. The only thing is, the Nikon D800E has got a base ISO of 100, whereas both the D850 and the Nikon D810 have got a base ISO of 64. So, in reality, you would expect them to have a larger dynamic range than the Nikon D800E. They don't, not in reality. The Nikon D810, I never upgraded to a Nikon D810 because I knew there was something going on with the dynamic range, and really and truly, if you look at it, 8.7 to 9.1 on the D800E, it's actually the worst performer of the lot because it's actually a third of a stop smaller dynamic range. But all the time they're making these so-called gains in dynamic range, you actually find that the gains aren't coming in the highlights, they're actually coming in the shadow end. And really and truly, if you expose correctly and expose your highlights over to the right hand end of the histogram, you're giving an extra dose of exposure to your highlights, but you're giving that same extra dose to your shadows as well. So really and truly with digital, as I've said before many times, to expose digital correctly, we should be using the same mental attitude to it and the same modus operandi, if you like, as when we used to shoot colour transparency film. In other words, you expose the highlights absolutely spot on and you let the shadows look after themselves. But obviously if you're shooting a scene which is high contrast, high dynamic range or high subject brightness range, such as a sunrise or more specifically a sunset, then you are going to obviously have more than 8.7, 9.1 stops worth of scene or subject brightness range. So you know you're going to have to bracket your shots anyway. So there you go. But anyway, all I wanted to do in this video is to point out to you that, to be quite honest, nearly all digital cameras that are around today within the current 35mm FX format, they're pretty much all the same dynamic range, give or take. I mean, this Nikon D800E come out in March 2012, yeah? It's had a few firmware updates, etc, etc. But basically, it's a March 2012 camera. The Nikon D810 came out in, what was it, mid 2014? And of course the D850 came out late 2017, and you know, I mean, it is what it is. I'd love a D850, I really would, but not because of what it's going to do for my image quality and my processing workflow, because it's going to do absolutely nothing. But I would find, I'm a geriatric old fart, so I would find the focus peaking and the tilty flippy out screen quite useful, but the flippy out screen wouldn't be very much use if I was shooting portrait format or portrait aspect ratio landscapes, because it only flips out one way. So anyway, there you go. So people ask me, Andy, people used to ask me, why don't you update to a Nikon D810? And now you know. And people say to me, well, Andy, why haven't you got a D850 instead of your D800Es? Well, now you know. A D850 would save me eyesight, save me squinting, and might speed up my picture taking a little bit with focus peaking, and it'd save me back and my knees with the flippy out screen sometimes. But you know, I mean, £3,500 for a flippy out screen and focus peaking, not really a good idea, is it? Anyway, I hope that has given you a little bit of food for thought, because you know, you've got £3,500 versus a good quality grade A used D800E. Is probably going to cost about £600-700. And you know, if you're coming from a D3 or a D500 or a D300 or one of the lower end Nikon cameras, I would strongly suggest you look at buying a good quality D800E as opposed to a D850 if you're on a budget. If you're not on a budget, if you've got money to throw around, buy the newest camera, because it all makes more sense. But just bear in mind this one thing: you won't get any more usable dynamic range. You might get a little tiny bit over a D800E in certain circumstances, but if you know what you're doing, you won't. And there you go, dynamic range. They're all the same. Let's just show you this one thing. I do have here, I did this for another of my patrons, Jeff, the other week. He brought his 5D Mark III up, and there's the 5D Mark III, and he's got 8.8 stops of dynamic range. Yes, it has. It took Jeff quite by surprise, actually. I must admit, it took me quite by surprise as well, considering the way the 5D Mark III handles its files and where it has its AD converter, and the fact that it won't record uncompressed 14-bit RAW files. But well, so you know, I mean, it is what it is, kids. Dynamic range, they're pretty much all of a muchness. They're all between 8.5 and 9 stops of dynamic range, really. That's the way you've got to look at it. And I'm not joking. In the grand scheme of things, if you're a landscape shooter, you will not notice the extra dynamic range between the likes of a D810, a D800E or a D850. You won't. Seriously, you will not. So like I said, if you're on a budget, spend your money wisely. So there you go, that's it. Hope this has given you some useful information and some food for thought. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. Click the subscribe button, click the ringety-tingety bell. If you don't like it, well, that's your tough luck. And if it does upset you, and you disagree with me, feel free, but just bear one thing in mind. It's most likely, seeing as I've been in this game for 40 years, I actually know more about this than you do. Yes. And what is it Ken Wheeler says? The angry photographer. The popular is rarely true, and the truth is never popular. So there you go, I've just shown you the truth. So do I expect this video to be popular? Be nice if it was. Wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't. Anyway, there you go. I shall see you again, folks, in the next video. So until then, tooroo.